Hi everyone, today I'll show you how to prevent your concealer from creasing with some of my favorite tips. So I'll start off by using the Prime Studio mattifying and pore minimizing primer with the black clay. This is translucent, so there is no black residue on your skin. I always use primers before applying my makeup because primers firstly fill in your pores and also create a nice even and smooth texture of your skin. They also help prevent creasing when you apply your concealer, and they also help keep that makeup on your face lasting all day. So I normally tap the primer underneath my eyes and then also down my T-zone and by my forehead. And the primer actually helps to make the skin nice and smooth and prepped for your concealer application. It helps to prevent those creases underneath the eyes, and it also makes your concealer last longer throughout the day. I also make sure that I don't use too much primer because big amounts of anything will lead to creasing. So my next step is foundation. I'm using the Pretty Natural Hydrating Foundation. I'm shade 220 Neutral Almond. And this foundation is amazing because firstly, it has a beautiful natural finish, but it also contains hyaluron and aloe vera, which is great for the skin. So I apply it all over my face. I make sure that I leave the area around my eyes open because that's when I will go in with my concealer afterwards and blend that nicely into my skin. I always apply my concealer after the foundation just because I prefer the way that it blends in with the foundation. I also suggest that if you are someone that is a beginner in makeup, rather opt for a liquid foundation like this one over a powder foundation, because what powder foundations can do is, if you are using a concealer, it's a little bit tricky. You need to use the concealer before you apply your powder foundation. Otherwise, if you use it after your powder foundation, your face might look a little bit flaky and dry, and we really don't want that. But if you are more advanced and comfortable with using makeup, then you probably already know that you should just apply the concealer first and then apply your powder foundation, but it's totally up to you. I'm using my liquid foundation, so I'll be applying this first and then going in with my concealer. So a liquid foundation and a liquid concealer are better for beginners because it's much easier to blend the two together. So I don't use a lot of foundation. I feel like if you're using no foundation or less foundation, the chances of creasing are lower. So that's why I just do a nice natural finish. I make sure that I don't put foundation around the eyes. So I like using a sponge because I like that it creates an airbrushed kind of a finish on the skin. You can also use your fingers if you want it like a little bit extra smooth. That also works well because your fingers do heat up when there's kind of skin on skin. So it's up to you. But I also really like how a sponge works on the skin and the finish it creates with my foundation. So my next step is concealer. I am using the Stay All Day 16-hour long-lasting concealer, and I do prefer a fluid concealer like this one over a heavy cream concealer. Why? Because fluid concealers last all day and they also help prevent creasing. So with a heavy creamy concealer, what that does is sometimes it creates a lot of wrinkles and creasing under the eyes because it's really hard to blend out. So opt for a fluid concealer like this one. So I made sure that I used not too much product. This is because if you use less product, you are less likely to have it stuck in those fine lines and create wrinkles and creases underneath your eyes. And what I like about your lighter liquid concealer is that it doesn't get stuck underneath your eyes and create those lines and wrinkles and creases when you blend it out. So I make sure that I wet the sponge before I use it. This way your makeup will look way more smoother and even, streak-free, and also look really flawless when you are blending it out. Also, a wet sponge absorbs less product and more of the product goes onto your skin, and that's what we want. If you don't have a beauty sponge, then just use your fingers. The heat from your fingers on your face will blend the concealer in really nicely. Also make sure that you tap with your beauty sponge and not swipe. Swiping will remove your makeup and you don't want that. You want it to be blended in, so just tap. So now I'm just going to be doing one last final blend with a sponge, because our next step is a very important step, and we will need a blended out flawless concealer application. My next step is to use the All About Matte. It is the fixing loose powder, and we're going to use this to set the concealer underneath the eyes. So using a damp sponge really helps to pick up the powder, and then you apply it underneath the eye. I don't really wipe it or swipe it off. I just press it in. Make sure to tap until the powder melts into the skin. This is the most important step for you to do so that it prevents any creasing from occurring. Now your concealer will stay all day.